What's up everyone, Ivan from Darkglass here, and today we're going to talk about how to connect and set up the presets of your anagram for live playing. In case you were wondering why my anagram is black, this is the Guitar Essentials limited edition. There are only 1,500 units available worldwide, and it comes with all the standard anagram blocks and effects, bass amps, cabinets, preamps, EQs, you name it, plus a curated library of guitar-specific amps and effects that's been co-developed by Undertones and Sweetwater. You can get this limited edition only through Undertones and Sweetwater, and once the stock is sold out, like I mentioned, 1,500 units, anyone with any anagram can purchase the guitar bundle from the Anagram Marketplace. Let's start with some general information about live playing, and then we'll explore the options we have available using Anagram. The setup of musicians has changed and evolved over the years, from relying entirely on amps and cabinets to fill a room, to maybe miking an amp and cabinet and maybe having somewhat limited PA support, to going direct with a DI or a preamp pedal, to now having a digital effects unit, a modular multi-effects, such as the Anagram, and also being able to have different and hybrid setups. None of these methods is inherently better than the other, because different situations call for different setups. One thing that remains important though, regardless of the setup that you're using, is how you monitor yourself and how you send the signal to the audience, and also how you hear yourself on stage. In the case of Anagram, you have a few different options to set up your presets and how you connect your setup depending on the situation that you're in. You can go fully direct, you can have a hybrid setup of going direct and still having an amp on stage, or you can treat the Anagram more like a traditional pedalboard with the flexibility of being able to swap effects on the fly and send those effects into your amp. Now let's explore some of these options. Going fully direct is great for minimalist setups when needing to travel light, which is often the case nowadays to save on travel costs, and also when playing on silent stages that require you to use in-ear monitoring. However, one disadvantage is that if you don't have in-ear monitoring and you rely exclusively on wedge floor monitors for your sound on stage, to anyone who's done this before, you probably know that the sound of wedge monitors is really not that pleasing. It's not so fun to play. The sound can be harsh, thin, and that just takes away from the experience and doesn't make it so fun to play. And we've worked so hard to get a great tone that we of course want to hear that great sound. And if you don't have the in-ear monitoring, it can be a bit challenging to go fully direct this way. This method is probably the easiest one to set up because you don't need to add anything to your preset. By default, the Anagram sends the signal of your instrument through all the outputs, so you don't need to add anything to your preset to send your signal to front of house, for example. One more important thing to mention is to set up the mixer of the Anagram the right way to get the most amount of output possible from the Anagram to the mixing console. To access the mixer, press and hold the top right potentiometer to access the mixer window. And here you can either boost the master all the way up to 0 or unlink the XLR outputs from the master. When you unlink one of the outputs from the master, it has the same effect as if the master was cranked fully up. You can also have a hybrid setup where you send a direct signal to front of house for the engineers to process for the audience, and then a separate signal going to your amp on stage. This hybrid option is really good also when using in-ear monitors, because you're sending the signal to front of house, they can process it for the audience, you're hearing everything very clearly through your in-ear monitors, but you also have the feedback of the amp on stage. You get to feel the amp, the air being moved, and especially for bass, it really helps to determine the note duration and how the low frequencies are interacting with the stage and also with the audience. And if you don't have in-ear monitors, having the amp on stage is definitely much better than relying only on floor monitors. For this example, I'll be using the Darkglass 212 neodymium cabinet, mic'd up with a Shure SM7B, together with the Aguilar Tonehammer 700 amplifier. Here we will also listen to two different examples, one going into the input of the amp and another one going into the return of the effects loop of the amp. To set up your preset for this scenario, all we need to do is add an output block between the amp block and the cabinet block of your preset, since we don't want to send a cabinet simulation into another real cabinet, because it can sound kind of dark and muddy. In this case, the sound will flow from the beginning of the signal chain up until the output block, and then from there it will go into your amp, and then also keep flowing down the signal chain of the anagram to the XLR outputs. What you probably noticed by listening to the samples is how different the direct tone is compared to the mic'd up sound of the physical cabinet. And that is because the cab simulation is an 8x10 cabinet, and what I have here is a 212, and also I'm using a different microphone. But one thing that's important to keep in mind and to remember is that what the audience hears and what you're sending to front of house is, in most cases, I would say 90% plus cases, going to be and is going to have to be different than what you hear on stage. Stages are different. Sometimes there's more resonance, sometimes they're really dry, and the sound that you need on stage is going to be different than what you need to send to front of house. So it's not really a make or break situation that both sounds are not the same. In case you were wondering why I had two samples, one going into the input of the amp and another one going into the effects loop of the amp, this is because the more traditional method, or the one that's probably most used, is going into the effects loop of the amp, because this way you're bypassing the preamp of your amplifier, and then it's mainly just used for volume, and you're gonna get the sound of your preset going into the amp, and then it's just making it louder. However, I've run into situations where I would have liked to have some EQ control of the amp on stage just to adjust some frequencies, because maybe the sound was too muddy on stage or not clear enough, and going into the input solves that. You might need to turn the gain quite a bit down depending on how you've set up your amp on your preset, but that's just an option. And as I mentioned, the most common method is going into the effects loop of the amp. Again, here it is really important to set up your mixer the right way to prevent any tonal or volume loss going from the anagram into your amplifier. To set this up, press and hold the top right potentiometer and either unlink the 1/4 inch outputs from the master or boost the master all the way up. For the last scenario, I'll be treating my anagram as a traditional pedalboard with the advantage of being able to swap effects on the fly without having to put a pedalboard together and set up cables and so on. Here, my amp will be my only source of tone, so I'll be connecting the anagram into the amp directly, no XLRs going out. And just to make it a bit more interesting for the video, I have, of course, I'm recording the cabinet with a microphone, but I also have a room microphone so you can hear more or less how it sounds in the room. As a little side note related to this scenario, if you have a completely blank preset, to get the same volume response as if you were plugging your bass directly into the amp, but in this case going from the bass into the anagram and then into the amp, you need to unlink the quarter-inch outputs from the master or have the master fully up. Otherwise, you will be sending less signal or volume into the amp compared to when you're plugging directly from your bass into the amplifier. I hope you found the video helpful. For more information on the Anagram and also the Guitar Essentials Limited Edition, please visit darkglass.com or click the links in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.